Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Allison and I'm a member of the mentoring team at the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women. I'm delighted that you're joining us for this session and thrilled that you're part of our community of mentees and mentors that spans the globe. This video is part of our Skill Boosting Mentoring series, designed to help you learn a range of tools, techniques, tips, and strategies that you can use in your mentoring relationships in this program, as well as when you go on to mentor others in your enterprises, in your jobs, and in your communities. We're pleased to welcome Professor David Clutterbuck, mentoring expert extraordinaire, co-founder of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council and practice lead at David Clutterbuck Partnership. He has a range of wisdom on mentoring to share with us and really will help us to boost our mentoring skills so we can all build mutually impactful, strong, and effective mentoring relationships. All of the videos are housed on the platform, so you can refer back to them whenever you'd like, throughout your time in the program and as an alum of the program. We encourage you to keep these conversations going in your mentoring relationships as well as via the platform with other mentees and mentors around the world. We're going to hand over to David Clutterbuck now for a Q&A session, and then another member of the team will join you at the end of the session to provide further ways that we can support you throughout your time in the program. I'm really delighted to thank Qualcomm and Qualcomm Wireless Reach for making this video series and this learning possible. With that, I will say a huge welcome and happy mentoring, everyone. We really hope you build a strong relationship and have a great time in the program. Enjoy!
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
What the research tells us is that effective mentors speak less than 20% of the time. What they're doing is creating a reflective space, some time to think where the mentee can feel really safe to talk through their own challenges and reach their own conclusions. If the mentor does all the talking, the mentee doesn't have that opportunity. Mentees also need to listen, but it's usually to stop and to think about what's just been said. So one of the critical skills for a mentor is knowing when to stop and just have some silence to let the mentee think rather than just jump in with another question. From our research, we've found that there are 5 kinds of listening. Some of them are a lot better and more effective than others. The least effective form of listening is where we're listening to disagree or to argue with somebody. Academics are very good at that, but it's really all about you, the person doing the listening. The second level is listening to respond. So you're thinking about, what am I going to say next? And it's still about you. And so it takes up all your mind is not focused on the other person, it's focused on how you are going to respond. The third level is listening to understand. So that means, how do you make sense of what the other person is saying? The fourth level is more complex. We call it listening to help the other person understand. And what we mean by that is we're listening to see how they make sense of what they're saying. Very different. And the last one is listening intuitively. And what we mean by that is we're listening for what's not being said. Is there a sort of silent presence of somebody else in the room who's not really there? What's going on? What does the body language match the tone of what the person is saying? Now, what we learn is that mentors are basically, really good mentors are in those last 3. They spend all of their time either listening to understand, listening to help the other person to understand, or listening intuitively. They're very rarely listening to respond or listening to disagree. And that means that they use silence a lot. They're not afraid just to sit and wait for the other person to think. It's quite okay to not to take notes, for example, but then to stop every now and then and say, what would you as the mentee like to capture from what we've just been saying? And that puts the ownership of the conversation back in, and the control of it back in the hands of the mentee. We have something called the rule of 3. It's a very simple process. The way that it works is this. You have a question that comes to your mind as you're listening to the mentee. But instead of asking that question when they pause, you just nod or say, yeah, and you let them go on. And then a second time that question occurs to you and it still seems a pretty good question, and you do the same. Only on the third time that that question has occurred to you and the person has stopped to pause for a moment, do you actually ask that question. What we find is most of the time either the mentee asks themselves a better question, so yours isn't needed, or you refine that question, you make it a better question, sharper question, or the question isn't needed anymore because the conversation has continued. When we go back to the original mentor, the goddess Athena, the way that she asked questions was to help the other person reflect and to think. She very often asked them, for example, to look at what they intended to do versus what they actually did, because those things are very different very often. She asked them about how what they were doing or what they planned to do met with their values as a person. So she would constantly be trying to make them think about what they were doing and how they thought about how they thought. She would also use lots of open questions. And we find that using questions that lead to yes/no answers, for example, isn't very helpful at all. But if we ask questions, so what do you think the results of that might be? Then we're actually getting somebody to think for themselves. We're putting that responsibility in the hands of the mentee. And just like there are 5 levels of listening, we find there are 5 levels of questioning. And one of those levels is the first one, isn't very helpful at all. It's the kind of question that you ask somebody to really put them down. So, you really think that's a good idea, do you? That's not very helpful. Or to ask a question just to find out some information. That's okay. That's useful, but it doesn't necessarily help the mentee a great deal. But when you get to asking questions because you're curious, you're now just starting to open things. When you're asking questions that help them become more curious, that help them to think through what they're thinking about, that's even better. But the most powerful questions of all are the questions that lead to new questions. So the question that you ask is a tentative exploration for what's the better question that we create from that, and the better question from that, and further and further. And that's the way real insights happen. And if you think about about a matrix of stepping in, which is helping somebody see things from their own perspective, versus stepping out, which is helping them to see things from somebody else's perspective. And on the other axis of the matrix is rational versus emotional. What we find is that if you're starting in one of the quadrants there, one of those boxes, if it's stepping in emotional, you're talking about how do you feel about this? There's only so many questions you could ask about how somebody feels before you need to move on to a different perspective. And it's changing the perspectives that enable somebody to come up with really interesting and valid solutions for themselves. We often talk about powerful questions in mentoring, and they're questions that really make people think. And we've done quite a lot of research into what constitutes such a question, because it's only powerful if it has a big impact on somebody. So a question that's powerful for one person may not be powerful to another. But we've got this acronym that we found is quite helpful. We call it PRAIRIE. And so powerful questions start by being personal. It sounds as if it was just made for you. They are resonant. They have an emotional impact on you, not just an intellectual input. They're acute and incisive, so they get straight to the point. They are what we would call reverberant. But what that means, they keep coming back to haunt you, like you hit a gong and the sound keeps coming back. It might be ages before the person answers that question. Somebody sent me an email a while ago that said, you won't remember me, you met me 15 years ago and you asked me some powerful questions in a mentoring session. And I've been thinking about them ever since, and 2 years ago I finally answered one of those questions and I completely changed my career, and I wanted to write and say thank you. I don't know who they were, I don't know what the questions were, but obviously it took a while for that question to come back and to haunt them. And the last thing, last two things, if the question is innocent. It's about helping them. It's not got your agenda in it. And finally, it's explicit. It's very simply expressed. If your questions can meet those criteria, they are much, much more likely to have a significant impact on the mentee.
Hola, me llamo Gabriela. My name is Gabriela, and I'm from the mentoring team. Thank you so much for watching this video and being part of our global community. Whether you're just getting started or well off into your relationship, remember that our team is on hand to support and to assist you with anything you need. We have a dedicated help desk just for mentors and mentees. We are always just an email, text, WhatsApp, or call away, and we would love to hear from you. We can provide coaching on how to use mentoring techniques, information on how to plan for your relationship, guidance on how to use our platform and where to find business, mentoring, and leadership resources, help connecting with your mentee or mentor, and lots of encouragement throughout your time in the program. Please do keep these conversations going via the forum and make use of the wealth of resources available on the platform. We wish you all the best during your mentoring relationship. Thank you.